Hi, I'm Odessa. My sister once laughed at my resume right there in front of a hiring panel, then made sure it never reached anyone's hands. They didn't ask questions, they just moved on. But what she didn't know was the man walking in next was my fiancé, her boss. And what I didn't know? That this wasn't the first time she'd erased me, just the first time she got caught. She warned the world I was unstable, told people I'd break under pressure. She smiled when she said it. So why did she flinch when I stood up? Why did they all fall silent when I finally spoke? I got there earlier than I needed to, half on purpose, half out of dread. Stormbridge's headquarters always had this glassy, surgical feeling to it, like walking into a high-end clinic where your confidence might get diagnosed and quietly removed. I stood outside the panel room, smoothing down my blazer, hoping it looked intentional and not like I'd slept in it. My resume folder, folded too many times to look new, felt heavier than it should have been. Or maybe that was me. When I finally stepped inside, a few other candidates were already seated. They were the type that looked like they belonged in rooms like this: crisp suits, hair like they'd walked out of a shampoo commercial, voices that said they never doubted their own worth. I gave a half smile to one woman who glanced up. She didn't return it. I took the only empty chair left slightly off-center, like even the furniture didn't think I fit. Then she walked in. Celine. Hair in a chignon so tight it probably cost more than my last haircut. Mug in hand. Perfect navy suit. She didn't look at me. Didn't even blink. She walked to the panel table as if I were part of the carpet. My sister no nod, no smirk, no recognition. 7 years since the last time she threw my career under a bus and smiled while doing it. And here we were again. Full circle. I sat still. If I shifted, I might collapse. One of the HR assistants walked around with coffee. Everyone got a cup. Everyone except me. Celine leaned toward the woman next to her, not whispering quite softly enough, and said, "She still dresses like she shops clearance racks." The woman chuckled short, polite, painful. My stomach turned, but I kept my eyes on the panel. I didn't need to look at her. I'd seen that performance before. They started calling names. Each candidate went up, introduced themselves, pitched their value like it was Shark Tank. Celine nodded at some, jotted notes. Others got follow-up questions. When they called my name, she didn't even lift her head. I walked up anyway, put my resume down in front of her. She picked it up, glanced for 2 seconds, then passed it to the man beside her like she was bored. He didn't bother pretending to read it, just slid it to the corner of the table. That was it. No questions, no eye contact, just a silent dismissal. I walked back to my seat. Someone behind me cleared their throat, awkward or amused. I couldn't tell. I kept my back straight. I didn't move when the next name was called. My face burned, but I sat there like I didn't feel it. I'd felt worse. I remembered nights I worked till 2 a.m. on freelance code reviews, remembered pitching frameworks to people who thought ethics was a typo. But this was her trying to erase me all over again. They moved on quickly. No one circled back to me. I was wallpaper. Then the door opened. Late. Confident. Warren Greer walked in with a file in his hand and a subtle nod to the board. He apologized for the delay, sat down at the head of the table, and said, "Let's not waste time." Celine froze. She didn't even hide it, just stared for a beat too long, then blinked, then masked it. Warren didn't look at me, not once, but I knew his tells the slight jaw flex, the tap of his pen when he was annoyed. And when he said, "Some decisions in here have to be earned, not staged," it wasn't for them. It was for her. Celine shifted in her seat, smiled that PR smile. "I didn't realize personal connections were part of the process now," she said lightly. Warren didn't flinch. "Neither are ghost-written contributions or suppressed referrals," he said, just as light. The panel shifted. The air got colder. I sat still. Didn't smile. Didn't blink. She leaned back slightly, and for the first time in a long time, her face faltered. Just a flicker. A twitch in the corner of her mouth that said this wasn't the outcome she planned. I looked at her. Really looked. My sister. The girl who used to read my journals aloud in middle school to her friends, just to hear them laugh at my dreams. The woman who took my framework, renamed it, and got the contract. The one who smiled at my ruin and still called it love. And right then, I said the quietest sentence I'd ever spoken, but it landed like thunder. This time, I won't be erased. Her eyes narrowed, but the room had heard. No one else spoke. That's when I knew something had shifted, not because of Warren, not even because of the truth, but because I wasn't afraid to say it out loud anymore. I didn't go straight home. I walked for a while, past Pike and all the places I used to avoid during lunch hours, when I was freelancing back, when I still thought proximity to the office meant proximity to success. The streets were damp, the air smelled like old rain and espresso grounds, and the buzz from what had just happened hadn't worn off yet. I needed the silence. I needed something that wants someone's opinion about who I was or wasn't. Warren offered to talk, asked if I wanted to get food, to debrief like we used to after chaotic meetings. I told him I was fine. Which one a lie, just a redirect. I didn't want comfort. I wanted answers, the kind no one else was going to give me. By the time I reached my apartment, the city had quieted. I tossed my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door and went straight to my laptop. There was no noise but the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the building settling. I opened my inbox and sat back. And there it was. A notification from a Zurich contact someone I'd pitched to months ago. Someone who'd seemed interested and then ghosted me. The message read, "So you're the younger sister she warned us about." I didn't move, just stared at the screen until my eyes started to burn. Celine. She hadn't just blocked me inside the company. She'd reached beyond it, across borders, across departments, across oceans, and she'd painted me with a brush I hadn't even seen coming. All this time, I thought I was being ignored. Turns out, I was being filtered. My hands curled into fists without thinking. It wasn't the first time. I just hadn't called it what it was before. I opened a document titled Shared Concepts Archive from a collaborative platform I used on a previous internal project. Scrolled down. My name was nowhere. The framework mine, the flow mine. But the listed creator, Celine W. There it was, dated 6 months ago. I remembered bringing it to her for feedback, thinking I was being proactive. That kind of foolishness doesn't burn until later, when you've got hindsight rubbing salt into the skin. I remember when the update email went out, saying, "Due to a miscommunication from leadership, we're adjusting contributors." Back then, I told myself it was an honest mistake. I didn't push, didn't escalate. I even apologized for the confusion. Now I knew better. This wasn't rivalry. It was a campaign. And there was a pattern. In every instance where I had something substantial, an idea, a deliverable, a moment, Celine was there. Not openly hostile, never overt. Just present. Close enough to touch the credit, far enough to blame the system when it shifted. She once introduced me to a colleague as the creative one, said I was sweet but didn't have the killer instinct. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because I thought that was how family worked. You tease, you take jabs, you move on. But she wasn't teasing, she was setting tone, and people believed her. Every time I stepped into a room with her name already there, the air shifted. It was like trying to light a candle in a wind tunnel. Tonight, I finally saw it all for what it was. I opened a new folder on my desktop, named it Evidentiary. I didn't know what I would do with it yet. I just knew I was done pretending this was sibling tension. It was structural, it was strategic. I clicked into archived emails, pulled up notes, saved Slack screenshots, where her name appeared too conveniently in discussions about my projects. She never outright said anything damaging. That was the genius of it. She just asked leading questions, flagged behavior, suggested better fits. Then I heard myself say it quietly, like testing a fragile truth on my tongue. She's not just my sister, she's the one trying to delete me. The words hung in the room like steam after a shower. That's when my phone lit up. Unknown number, no caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, watched the transcription appear as it recorded. Hi, Odessa. This is Valerie from HR. We need to clarify something about today's panel. There was an inconsistency we'd like to discuss. Please call back when you can. She didn't sound annoyed. She sounded off, like someone who just found out the room wasn't as secure as they thought. I didn't move. Not yet, because before I stepped back into that building, I needed to know exactly who I was walking in as. Not the girl who waited to be seen, not the sister hoping to be heard, but the version of myself they'd spent years trying to write out of the story. I didn't sleep. Not really. I dozed off around 4 a.m., slumped on the couch with the voicemail still playing on loop in my head, Valerie's voice clipped and controlled. We need to clarify something about today's panel. She didn't sound angry. She sounded careful, and that scared me more. By 6:30, I was in the kitchen, holding a chipped mug of cold coffee I hadn't even sipped. My hands kept tracing the rim, over and over. I wasn't waiting for anything. I just didn't know what else to do. The silence in that apartment wasn't peaceful. It was familiar. It was the same kind I'd grown up in, where conversations ended before they began, where emotions were things you folded neatly and hid under placemats. I opened my laptop and pulled out the notebook I kept buried behind bills and forms. Inside were old entries, some I hadn't read in years. The handwriting was sloppier then. Hopeful, too. I flipped to a dog-eared page marked Mom's 60th, and just like that, it all came rushing back. 2 years ago, my 35th birthday, I had spent weeks making a photo album for Mom. Not a digital one, either. I had it printed, bound, filled with captions and notes and family stories it pieced together from phone calls, text threads, and memory. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. We were at Belmont House, a restaurant Mom liked when she wanted to feel fancy without seeming like she was trying. Everyone was there. Celine had walked in 20 minutes late, breezing past the hostess like the room waited for her to arrive. When I handed the gift to Mom, she smiled. But before she even opened it, Celine chimed in with that polished tone she used when she was putting people in their place under the guise of compliment. I told Odessa this was exactly the kind of thing you'd love, she said, lifting the ribbon like it had her name on it. My throat clenched. I waited for someone to correct her. No one did. Mom opened the album, gasped, smiled wide, and turned to Celine. You remembered the story about Grandma's porch swing? Celine nodded, sipping her wine like it was routine. Of course. I had scanned that photo at midnight the week before, cleaned the creases in Photoshop, wrote the caption. I didn't say a word. I watched everyone flip through the pages. My brother asked if Celine had done the whole thing herself. She laughed. And I swallowed it again. Later that night, as we were walking to the parking lot, Mom touched my arm lightly and said, Don't make this a thing, Odessa. It's just a gift. Just a gift. Like it wasn't about being erased. Like it wasn't about people clapping for the wrong person while the right one quietly disappeared from the frame. I closed the journal and leaned back in my chair. Now, with the résumé incident, the Zurich message, and Valerie's voicemail echoing in my ears, the timeline lined up so clearly I wondered how I'd ever missed it. She didn't just take credit. She took space I wasn't allowed to claim. Celine had always had the mic. I'd always been the one adjusting the lighting, making sure her angles worked. And every time I tried to step forward, she adjusted the frame again, kept me out of focus. I opened my desktop, found the folder from the night before evidentiary, renamed it The Record They Can't Rewrite. And then I opened the first email, dated March 19th last year. Subject line, Can I use your draft for something internal, just to pitch the structure? Celine. My breath didn't hitch. It didn't break. It stayed steady. That was the last time I ever said yes without checking what she planned to turn it into. 2 days passed, and the air in the building had changed. I could feel it the moment I stepped off the elevator on the 23rd floor. It wasn't dramatic, not icy stairs or pointed silence. Just a shift. A second longer pause in greetings. Smiles that ended too soon. People looking past me like I wasn't part of the picture. Valerie met me outside the break room with a folder under her arm. No small talk, no pretense. She handed it to me and said, "This came through the feedback survey anonymous, but part of the required quarterly rotation." Then she turned and walked away. I opened it while standing by the fridge. Half the comments were routine collaboration strong, responds well under pressure. Then I saw the last line. "She's only here because she's sleeping with someone upstairs." My hands didn't shake, not even a blink. But my chest felt hollow, like something had dropped inside me and kept falling. I folded the paper and slipped it into my coat pocket. Not out of shame, just instinct. And suddenly, all the little things made sense. The people who stopped looping me in, the projects reassigned for bandwidth reasons, the briefings I wasn't invited to anymore. I thought it was burnout, or politics, or just bad luck. But no, it was her. Celine had been framing me as a favor hire, a decoration, the woman who'd landed her role because of who she dated, not what she built. I scrolled LinkedIn later that day, searching for something unrelated. Her post popped up first. "Merit is more than a sum. It's what people say when you leave the room." The caption had nearly 100 likes. I didn't need to read the comments. Years ago, she introduced me to a guy at a networking mixer in Palo Alto. Ben something. He was charming, smart, worked in behavioral UX. We dated casually until he ghosted me without explanation. A few months later, I found out he'd stayed in touch with Celine. And during a company dinner, I'd overheard her say something low and polished, laughing just enough to sound effortless. "She's not built for this world. She still thinks skill matters more than image." I thought she meant it as a joke. Now I realize she meant it as a warning to him, to anyone. That line had come back like static in my ears. I went into a small side room, one we usually used for huddle calls, and stood there for a minute. Then I pulled out the dry erase marker and wrote across the whiteboard. She didn't ruin my chances. She rerouted the story so I wouldn't be the narrator. It wasn't rage I felt. It was precision. Celine didn't need to lie. She just steered perception. Repeated a half-truth until it solidified. Took up space until mine collapsed around her. I pulled out my phone and typed a short message. Company-wide. No name, no tone. Just this. Clarifying a common misunderstanding. I was hired after 3 rounds of evaluation and passed internal review independently. Relationships do not influence operational fit or project assignment. This is not up for debate. I sent it. No flair, no hashtag, just facts. Warren texted me 5 minutes later. That was cold and perfect. I didn't respond. On my way to the elevator, a junior analyst named Drew stopped me. He looked nervous, clutching his tablet like it was a shield. "Hey, just so you know, your sister told a few people you're kind of sensitive to feedback. She said to be gentle with you, so you don't get overwhelmed." I blinked at him once, slowly. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, and I kept walking. It wasn't about a resume. It never had been. The next morning, I arrived at the office before the sun touched the skyline. The streets downtown were still damp from a light overnight rain, and the lobby echoed with the kind of quiet that made your footsteps sound like accusations. I took the elevator alone. My fingers hovered for a second before pressing 22. When the doors opened, the hallway lights were still half-dimmed. I liked it better that way. The conference room was empty, just like I needed. Same table, same polished glass, same chairs that didn't shift when you sat in them, as if refusing to accommodate anyone not already molded for them. I placed my folder down in front of the lead seat, printed resume inside, a label on the front. Not to be misplaced again. I didn't sit. I stood for a moment, arms crossed, breathing. This wasn't performance. This wasn't for anyone else. This was for me. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar soft click of heels. Valerie entered mid-sentence, reading off something on her phone. She looked up, blinked. "Oh. Odessa," she said, caught off guard. I didn't smile. "Just getting ahead of the day." She hesitated, then walked around the table, stopping when her eyes caught the folder. Her lips parted for a second, no words. Then she simply adjusted her stance, like maybe she'd just seen something she wasn't ready to explain. Did anyone ever ask why my file never got passed around during the panel? She opened her mouth again. This time, nothing came. Just a quiet breath. Her silence said everything. 10 minutes later, the team started arriving. Coffee in hand, shuffling notes, exchanging small talk. The usual noise of people pretending they hadn't read each other's emails behind closed doors. Celine entered last. Always timed, always deliberate. The informal strategy huddle began with her usual cheerfulness. "Let's get aligned," she said. "We've got a lot of moving parts and little time to waste. Alignment over perfection, right?" I let her speak. Let her take up the air. Then I leaned slightly forward in my seat. "Before we move forward," I said, "tone level. Can we make sure everyone's names are where they actually belong this time?" The room froze. Celine turned her head, slow. Her eyes flicked to mine. A tight smile curved at the edges. "Of course. Attribution's important," she replied smoothly. "We're nothing without shared accountability." Someone coughed. Someone else shifted in their seat. But no one said a word. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Celine caught me near the hallway between the elevators and the back office. "You don't want to start a Cold War in front of people who already think you don't belong here?" she said quietly, but not soft. I didn't blink. "You've been at war with my existence since the moment I stopped letting you speak for me." Her smile thinned. She opened her mouth to respond, but it already turned away. Back at my desk, I printed out the latest org chart and laid it flat across my table. I added 3 sticky notes: actual contributor, visible face, ghost. Then I placed the third one on my own name, folded the page, walked it over to Valerie's desk, left it right under her notepad. No explanation needed. I left around 4:30, early by company standards, but it earned that exit. As I walked past the corner suite, I spotted Celine through the glass, speaking to a man in a gray blazer I didn't recognize. She was smiling, leaning slightly forward, whispering. He glanced at me when I passed. Not rudely, just long enough to register something he wasn't supposed to notice. And I knew. Whatever she was planning next, it was already underway. The war room smelled like dry erase markers and warm plastic. I sat 2 seats from the front as the projector flickered to life, casting pale light across the table. Around me, department heads and project leads murmured in that polished corporate tone people use when they want to look busy without saying much. I kept my face still. I knew what was coming before it even hit the screen. The slide deck was titled The Ray Initiative. My hands rested quietly in my lap. I didn't blink as the slides clicked forward, clean, polished, detailed. Every structure, every framework, every bullet point carried the cadence of my voice, but none of my name. It was mine, stripped and rewrapped with her signature font and branding. No one noticed me. They watched Celine, who stood confidently, speaking with that mix of charm and control that made people believe what she wanted them to believe. When the lights came back on, the room applauded. Not wildly, just enough to validate her. Just enough to make the theft stick. I stood without speaking and slipped out before the side comments could catch up with me. I made it halfway down the hall when my phone buzzed. A message. From Jen, an intern I barely knew. It was a screenshot from a private Slack thread. At first, I thought she sent it to me by mistake. But then I saw my name. The message read, "Odessa's not stable lately. Just keep her from derailing momentum. Let her talk, but don't let her drive. Trust me." Signed, Celine. It wasn't even subtle. I stopped walking, read it twice, the second time slower. She'd framed me again. Not in public, not directly, but enough to erode trust, to make people think I was a risk that happened to be engaged to the CEO. I didn't respond to the message. I just typed, "Thanks," and kept walking. Celine was at the coffee station when I found her, alone, fixing her mug like she owned the machine. I walked up without saying a word, pulled the printed screenshot from my folder, and placed it on the counter between us. She didn't flinch. She didn't even pretend not to recognize it. "Now I know," I said, calm as concrete. "Keep pushing." She picked up her mug, took a sip, and met my eyes. "You wouldn't last a week in this world without that ring on your finger." I smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough. "I lasted years in it without your lies propping me up." Her jaw moved like she had a retort, but nothing came. I walked away. Back in the review room, they were prepping the final segment questions and feedback. I walked to the front of the room, asked for the remote. No one stopped me. I switched the final slide with one of my own. Metadata, audit logs, date stamps, side-by-side comparisons of draft documents mine and the one Celine presented. A quiet fell across the room. I didn't narrate, didn't explain, just pointed at the signature block on her slide and then to the server log that predated it by 4 weeks. My initials, my credentials, my system. When I finished, I placed the remote down. No one clapped. No one needed to. Warren was seated across from me. He didn't say a word, but his chin dipped once just enough. Valerie adjusted her glasses and sat straighter. Celine leaned back in her chair. Her expression unreadable, but her silence finally said something. I left shortly after. At home, around 6:30 p.m., I was sipping tea when I got the alert. A calendar invite had popped into my inbox. Subject line: Concerns raised, HR follow-up required. Scheduled for tomorrow. Mandatory. But the sender, not HR. It was routed through Celine's admin proxy account. She'd used her override clearance to set up a fake performance coaching session. She hadn't just crossed the line. She erased it completely. The morning after that fake HR alert, I walked into the internal audit center 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Not because I was nervous, nerves were for people trying to survive. I wasn't trying to survive anymore. I was building a record, and every second counted. Every login, every keystroke, every trace. I wanted my name stamped first in the security log for the day. Valerie met me at the glass double doors. Her blazer was sharp, but her face was tight, and her tone was clipped lower than usual, like she already knew what I was about to find. "I've looped in IT," she said without making eye contact. "One of the analysts will walk you through the server trail. They're prepped." "Good," I replied. No small talk. A junior tech walked me into a quiet corner room with no windows and a single monitor already open to an internal dashboard. It took 10 minutes to locate the source of the HR calendar invite that nearly derailed my project review. It hadn't come from HR's actual system. Instead, it was triggered by a ghost admin override, someone using elevated permissions to mimic HR protocol. The digital fingerprint linked back to a single point of access: Celine's. I didn't ask why it hadn't been flagged earlier. I didn't yell, accuse, or flinch. I copied the log files, saved the admin traces, and added a digital hash confirmation. Then I opened a new folder on my laptop titled Policy Violation, Phase 1. I dropped in everything. After that, I filed a formal complaint, no emotion, no speculation. Just timestamps, metadata, and the quiet force of digital truth. Later that afternoon, I sat at the outer edge of the executive roundtable. Celine, polished in slate gray silk, was dead center, speaking with the poise of someone who'd never been told no. She was presenting a strategy report supposedly developed over the past month, something she called an adaptive path forward to reposition Stormbridge's market resilience through cross-functional stakeholder engagement. I didn't need to hear much. I already recognized the architecture of every argument. Her speech was built entirely from a document I'd drafted 4 months ago, revised, and shelved for confidential internal analysis. She hadn't even changed the phrasing, just the font. No attribution, no quotation, no acknowledgement. It was my voice, my tone, my structure, coming out of her mouth like she'd dreamed it up over espresso. I didn't say a word. Not until she wrapped up. When the floor opened for questions, I raised my hand calmly. "I'd like to clarify the authorship lineage of that material," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Professional. Celine blinked, once. I stood, plugged in my drive, and projected two versions onto the shared screen, her document and mine side by side. I highlighted timestamps, internal draft metadata, and change history. Then I displayed a Slack message from Celine, dated weeks prior. Hey, mind if I use your framework to guide my report? Just the outline. Silence dropped over the room like lead. Nobody moved. Not even Warren, who usually found a way to diffuse tension with a cough or a quip. One board member finally broke the stillness. How did this clear compliance? Valerie didn't answer. She looked like she wanted to shrink into her chair. Warren leaned forward, hands folded. We'll need a full audit. Misattributing strategic IP crosses the line into ethics tier review. Still, Celine said nothing. Her mouth had gone tight, but her eyes were unreadable. I wasn't done. From my folder, I pulled out a single-pagina printout from my original strategy file. I slid it across the polished table. Highlighted at the top right corner was her digital signature, embedded into my stolen work. That wasn't a reference error, I said clearly. That was fraud. A pen clicked. Someone exhaled too loudly. Nobody spoke in her defense. Not even the allies she always assumed would jump to her side. Not even Valerie. I gathered my materials without ceremony and returned to my desk. I sat down, opened a new folder labeled SB Ethics, Tier 3 Protocol, and bookmarked a single line from the Compliance Handbook. Subsection 4.2.sin. Knowingly misattributing strategic content for personal elevation constitutes a Tier 3 ethical breach. I didn't need to memorize it. I already understood what it meant. She used to write the rules in this place. Now I knew exactly how to use the ones she thought no one read. And I wasn't just reading them, I was about to enforce them. By the time I reached the conference room, it was already humming with quiet tension. No one dared speak above a murmur. Conversations, if you could call them that, were clipped and cautious, more glances than words. It was the kind of silence that didn't invite comfort. It warned of fallout. The blinds were drawn halfway, casting streaks of uncertain light across the table. Even the sun, it seemed, had been told to withhold judgment. I stepped in slowly, purposefully. My folder under my arm felt heavier than it should, because it didn't just hold documents. It held truth. Proof. Closure, maybe. Every seat was taken. Legal sat stiffly on one side, HR flanked them, and the board members, some beamed in through screens, others perched in person, were arranged like jurors, waiting to weigh someone's life work on a scale that never favored nuance. Valerie sat near the far end of the table, hands clasped tightly in her lap like she was trying to hold something together. Her lips were a thin line. No welcome, no nod. Warren, across from her, didn't even glance my way. But his phone, his eternal distraction, lay face down, screen blank. That silence told me everything. He was paying attention. I walked to the front and placed the folder gently on the table, aligning its edges like that would somehow organize the moment. I took a deep breath, not for drama, but because what came next required space. This isn't about revenge, I said, letting my voice carry just enough. It's about truth, credit, and the quiet ways people are erased when no one's looking. The air shifted. Stillness tightened. I opened the folder, pulled out a single flash drive, and inserted it into the console. One click, one file, a faint rustle, the clink of cutlery. Then, Celine's voice, unmistakable. She only builds things so others can live better. That's her place. She should stay there. It was from a company dinner, a year ago, a casual conversation over wine and salmon. Her tone wasn't cruel, not outright. It was something worse. Offhand. Like my purpose had been decided long ago. The sound cut off, but the echo of it lingered. No one spoke. No one moved. The room had fallen so silent, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I let the moment sit. Let it burn. Then I moved. From the folder came a careful sequence. Project drafts with metadata, email chains that outlined development cycles, time-stamped spreadsheets. access logs that told their own story. I had even highlighted margins, notes in my handwriting, beside final polished versions bearing Celine's name. And finally, the handbook section 4.3 defining authorship policy and ethical representation. Valerie cleared her throat. This will initiate a full ethics review. Before she could finish, a board member raised his hand and cut in. This isn't just ethics, he said, his voice low but clear. This is culture. Celine didn't shrink. Of course not. She leaned forward slightly, eyes flicking across the table. You think this company got here because everyone played nice? Because people stayed in their lanes? I turned to her, not to shout, just to look her in the eye. No, I said. It got here because people like me built lanes from scratch, and people like you repainted them with your name. She blinked. Just once. But it was enough. The board didn't need long. The compliance officer read the decision aloud in a voice stripped of emotion. Suspension pending formal investigation. Immediate access restrictions. Clinical. Clean. Final. Celine rose slowly, her smile practiced. Not warm, never warm. It was the same tight-lipped pride she wore as a kid when she took something of mine and dared me to claim it back. You'll always be the shadow, she said. You just got a little sunlight today. I met her gaze, steady, and you'll always need darkness to shine. She didn't respond. Just left, heels clicking like punctuation. No applause, no cheers. Justice doesn't come with a standing ovation. Just the quiet satisfaction of something finally being seen. As the room began to empty, Warren approached. He didn't say a word, just handed me a sealed envelope. I waited until I was alone at my desk before I opened it. Inside was a letter official, stamped cold. Reinstatement, recognition of authorship. Final line. You may choose where to lead next. I read it twice, then a third time, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to consider something new. Maybe I didn't want to lead where they expected. Maybe I didn't want their map at all. Maybe the next step was mine to draw. And this time, the signature at the bottom would be mine. It's quiet now. Not the biting silence that cuts into your nerves or makes you feel like something's wrong. No, this silence is the kind that wraps around you like a soft blanket on a cold morning. It's a silence that lets you exhale not because everything's perfect, but because you finally stopped holding your breath. It's been 1 week since the board meeting. 1 week since I stood in a room full of people who once dismissed me, overlooked me, rewrote me. This morning, I walked into the building not as anyone's shadow, not as a scandal, not as a sibling, not as a whisper, just me. And that was enough. They offered me Celine's old office. Of course they did. It was the natural assumption. A corner office with glass walls, skyline views, and the plaque still warm from her name. But I said no kindly, firmly. Not because I wasn't worthy of it, but because I didn't need to sit where she sat to prove anything. I asked for a desk near the dev team. It's a smaller space. No skyline, but plenty of sunlight from the east-facing windows. The kind of light that moves through the day. The kind you notice. There's a quiet hum from keyboards, snippets of code talk, and the occasional shout when something finally compiles. It's real. It's in motion. And most importantly, it's being built, not maintained. That's where I belong. I set my coffee down and unpacked a few small things. A plant. A photo. And the same folded arsum I carried that day. Celeste waved it aside. The ink slightly faded from too many rewrites. I pinned it to the corkboard with a neon sticky note. You don't need their seat to own your space. No one saw me do it. That was the point. Around noon, my phone lit up. A number I hadn't saved, but recognized anyway. My father. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail and waited until I was ready to listen. His voice was quieter than I remembered. I didn't know how much you were carrying. I see it now. I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. That was it. No excuses, no backtracking, just those words. I didn't call back. I didn't delete it either. I just saved it. Maybe I'll listen again. Maybe I won't. Maybe it'll mean something more one day. But right now, I'm letting it be what it is. Not closure, not a door, but a window. One I'm not ready to open yet, but I appreciate knowing it's there. Later that day, I walked past the hallway outside the old panel room, the one where I used to sit, just outside the door. There was a specific chair, the one next to the restroom, always mysteriously available, no matter how packed the floor was. That was my seat. Not officially, but always. It was the seat they gave someone they didn't quite want to include, but didn't have the nerve to exclude completely. I stopped, reached out, ran my hand along the wall. It used to feel cold, like a warning. Now it just felt like drywall. Maybe I was just warmer now. Someone had taped up a flyer nearby, something about a mentorship lunch for interns. I read the details, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel a pang. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. It was just a flyer, and I was just here. That was enough. Word had spread. Celine was gone. No statement, no scandal, no explanation, just silence. Her inbox stopped replying. Her keycard stopped working. Her name quietly vanished from the team list. No drama, no flameout, just a door clicking shut. Not every ending comes with applause. That afternoon, I passed a girl in the waiting area. Couldn't have been more than 22. Shaky hands, wide eyes, résumé clutched like it might fly away. I recognized that look, the one I used to wear like armor. I slowed. "They might forget to offer you coffee," I told her gently. "Ask anyway. You deserve to be here." She blinked, startled, nodded, unsure. I didn't wait for her response. I just kept walking. That night, I opened my old journal, the one that hadn't felt like mine in months. The pages were filled with words from a woman trying to be liked, to be picked, to be enough. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one line. My name was never the problem. It just wasn't printed where they expected. I closed the journal and walked to the window. The skyline was still there. Same buildings, same glow. But tonight, it didn't feel like something looming over me. It didn't feel like glass I'd never get through. It felt open. It felt like a beginning.